Yeah, so welcome back to our Excel show, video number 4, talking about pivot tables that we found out to be one of the most powerful tools that Excel offers for data analysis. To produce a pivot table, it does make sense to either mark the area of data that you want to talk about or to define an array or define a name, as it's called in Excel, called database. I did this before, so if you click, if you use the drop-down field here, you see that there is only one name available, and that one name is database. And if we mark that database, then in fact everything is marked from this very first cell here, number in row 12, and goes down to row 20198 to this very last cell, EF 20198. If we have something like this, and now I could also click on number again, or click somewhere there, then we are ready to insert a pivot table. Of course, you could also insert without doing this, but it does make more sense to define this beforehand. To insert a pivot table, we use the ribbon Insert, and on the very left-hand side we have Pivot Table. If we click on Pivot Table, the system is going to ask us, okay, what is the data source? And you see this is exactly the area that we just talked about, A12 to EF 2098. Normally, I recommend to choose a new worksheet. You can see that you could also use an external data source, so you could do this in another Excel file. You could use a database file from Access, from Microsoft Access, or something like this. I recommend to use a new worksheet, so it's going to make a new table or worksheet within Excel. It's just called Sheet 1 here, or we could directly rename this by calling it Pivot, or Pivots, Pivot, whatever. So what we see, we have this empty pivot table, and if you normally, as a standard, this is activated here, that as long as you are somewhere within that pivot table, then on the right-hand side you have this field list here. Now, if I click somewhere outside, then there's only the empty table and there's no information. But if I click somewhere inside, then I've got something here. And now we can start to drag and drop. Typically, we would like to start to analyze something by age and gender. This is the first things that we did. We said, let's take gender as the data column. So I drag and drop this here, and I get gender, I don't know, female, male, and blank. We are not interested in the people who don't know their gender, so we remove them, and then we have female, male, and we always get something like the grand total. We want this analyzed by age group, so let's put the age group here. And the same story, we want to exclude those who don't tell us their age. And that's basically how a pivot table looks like, but of course it doesn't make a lot of sense without having something in the middle, with values in the middle. What we discussed in class and what I recommend is that we take a variable that is sort of always available. So we could use, what I normally use is the number, the current number of the observation that just goes from 1 to 2000 and whatever observations we have. The advantage is that we then always count all the variables, all the observations. The disadvantage is if I go there, it typically by default takes the sum. And the sum doesn't make a lot of sense here. So we directly have to change the way, the content that is shown here. It says here values down here, the sum of number. So what I want to do, I want to change the value field settings. What you see here, I just clicked on that drop-down button, and I tell the system I don't want the sum, I want the count. So if I now click on count, this is what I get as a result. If this is our first pivot table, it tells us that there are 1,963 people who answered, who gave us information about their gender and their age. So around 100 people sort of were lost because they didn't tell us either their gender, or didn't tell us either their gender or their age, or both. But these 1,963, this is where we have the information. And this is a typical cross table. Yeah? Statistically speaking, this is a cross table, and that means counting the number of observations. By age and gender. No? This, yeah, as I said, the typical cross table, we could change this by doing by analyzing the same in percentage. And as we also saw and did in class, what I normally do, I copy this pivot table that is sort of formatted and talks about the things I want to see, and then I just copy it, Control-C, and then go down here and insert. And now here I change again. You saw that we are able to go down here and say value field settings, and you might have seen that already also here when I go directly, when I stay in the table count of number, I use the right mouse button and they have the same possibilities, value field settings. I could go there. I can also go here and say show values as. This is even quicker because now I can say I want to see it as percentages of the grand total. When I click on this, we see that perhaps we only use one digit. We see that 69% were women, 31% were men, and we see the distribution of the age groups. So in fact, the biggest age groups that we observe in all genders are between 50 and 69. Where here between 50 and 59, there are far more women as compared to men, but then sort of retirement age 60 to 69 and 70 plus, still there are more women, but not that big difference between those. So that would sort of be a cross table of not of absolute frequencies, but of relative frequencies. This we could say we're counting or analyzing frequencies. As I said, we call this absolute frequencies. And we call this relative frequencies. This is already something useful in Excel, useful to use pivot tables for. But what is even more interesting for us is that we typically would like to have information about some variable. So for example, we would like to analyze variables, and let's say we want to talk about the overall evaluation that the people gave about the exhibition. Let me just copy this, analyzing data, and I copy here what that was the question number 24, Q 24. What is your general impression about the Pauline Paris exhibition? So to do this, again, I copy, oops, that wasn't a good idea. I copy the pivot table down here. But now what I want to do, I want to analyze not the count of number that we had here, so I remove that one. But I want to analyze the question 24. Now we have to check the questionnaire to find out which variable this is, and we were going to find out this is variable 82. Variable 82 is the variable that ranges from 1 equal very negative to 5 equaling very positive. So we want to analyze this. When we just drag and drop it either here or over there, we are going to get a count. Again, you see here it's count of V82, but we now know that we can click here, use the right mouse button, and either go to value field settings, but it's even quicker to use this, as you saw before. Summarize values by, show values as. Summarize values by, and now what we need is the average, because what we are analyzing is a metric variable, and this metric variable goes from 1 to 5, so we can do a normal arithmetic mean, a normal average. And when we do this, and we should again change the number of digits, that might make sense. We see that on average, people were very content. 5 is the maximum, so 4.4 is a good number. Female were a bit more content with the exhibition than men. Especially there's an age effect. What we can see that the younger the people, the less content with the exhibition, where 3.9 is still a positive number, but nevertheless. And the sort of the older, this is really in a continuously increasing here. The older the people are, the higher their perception, the higher the evaluation. So that is one possibility to analyze the average of a metric variable. And we can do the same with dummy variables again. So let me, for a last time, copy the whole table, Control-C, Control-V, and analyze, let's say, again, the question 1, and let's say, what about personal recommendation, variable 3? We heard that personal recommendation, these variables are dummy variables, so they have values 0 and 1. And what we said was here we can again use an average. So let us remove average of V82 again, and then talk about variable 3. Variable 3, I'm here because of personal recommendation. And so I do this. Again, you see the system gives us the count. This is unfortunately where Excel starts all the time when you put numbers in there, or variables that look like numbers. So again, I use the right mouse button. I say summarize values by, and I choose average again. And now we have these averages that look, if I only have one digit, relatively similar, but we might recall, okay, these are now percentages. So why don't we click on percent, and we see that, in fact, there are quite some differences. Not between the genders, that seems to be relatively similar, but between the ages. So here it's sort of the other way around. If we compare to before, here it's 50% of the young people heard it by word of mouth. And that might be talking to a friend, that might be Facebook or whatever. People communicate or communicated in 2007. Whereas we will see when we analyze the same or a similar thing, let's say V2 because of reports, V1 because of advertising, we will see that then older people tend to answer more in this direction. So basically, I don't want to go into too many details here. I might write this down. This is about question 1, why are you here? And then variable 3, personal recommendation. That's basically what is answered here and what we did analyze here. That should be enough for our quick Excel introduction, showing you the possibilities. And as you have the homework to analyze the data, answering your teamwork questions, I hope that with this information that I gave you here, you will be able to do these analysis and answer the questions.